Mayor, you mentioned at the county council a few days ago about the approximately $500,000 that was spent at the encampment. Is there any way you can elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure, Pete. It was when you're at council, when you're speaking, you're often trying to pull a lot of different ideas together at once on the fly. I was using that as a sort of rounded number, but I think after taking some reflection, it's actually fairly accurate. I'm going to use the response that I've sort of been drafted, which is of course a very well drafted response, and we'll just explore it after. I spoke of the additional financial strains faced by the town of Coburg due to our geographic proximity to the essential services. So it's not just one encampment, but we're always dealing with issues because of the different social services that are provided, and that has a financial impact on our tax levy. I'm incredibly proud of the work that the county has done to acquire the property. I mean, we've tasked the staff at the county to look for solutions to the problems we're having in our social service delivery. And they're thinking outside the box and they're coming up with solutions. So I just want to make sure that what I'm talking about isn't necessarily a criticism of the work staff are doing, because the staff are tasked with the job of that county council gives them. My criticism was directly to my councillors at the county around who's picking up the tab, because while these programs are being administered in Coburg, all of the effects of these programs having on our financial impact is all just being borne by Coburg residents. I believe this space will allow us to implement a concentration of services. That goes without saying. It's essential that we consider all direct and all residual costs associated with that program. And so where that sort of $500,000 number came from is really on the fly. We did a very detailed cost calculation in the month of October. We didn't even look at the policing costs, but just based around fire, administrative work, bylaw, clerks, our CAO's time, my time, everyone's time that goes into, say, working in the month of October around the issues of the encampment in just that month, we're closing in on the $40,000 to $45,000 mark. So what I did is I took that number, $40,000 to $45,000, I added $5,000 minimum for added police costs at 50, and then I looked at how many months we've sort of been dealing with these issues, going as far back to when it was at the beach, et cetera, and I looked at about 10 months. So I did a quick math in my head of, $40,000 to $50,000 a month multiplied by 10 months puts us in around the $500,000 ballpark. I think people need to understand that even with when we start considering legal fees, when we are dealing with the legalities of dealing with upper level governments, the province, our upper level tier at the county, every time we're working with legal, that's money as well. And so when the citizens of Coburg are demanding action, we're listening and we're taking that action. But in taking that action, whether it's through enforcement, whether it's through eviction, whether it's through supports, whether it's through any of the action that the community is asking us to take, which we're happy to do to make sure our community feels safe and provided, that has monetary impacts. And so that's what I was speaking to at the county, Pete.
What can you tell me? Yesterday, a number of senior staff went through the encampment, and whenever you said to senior staff, they said I'd have to go to Infrastructure Ontario for comment. It's just an open-ended question, but I mean, why should anybody have to go to IO when it deals with the town of Coburg?
I think I spoke to that at the town hall, and I'll speak to it again. We're in a very precarious situation when dealing with IO. IO is part of the provincial government, and we as a lower tier are essentially in existence due to the legalities that they've created, so the laws that they make is our existence. So we have to be very careful when interacting with our upper levels of government. When it comes to communications regarding the encampment on the Brookside property, we're consistently looking for guidance from the province as to how to proceed. And we're looking to see what that relationship is, and we're asking these very difficult questions. So when senior staff are answering that that's a decision for IO to answer, or a question for IO to answer, that's because that's the best legal advice we've got.
Is it, in one word, is it as frustrating for members of the town as it is for a member of the media to deal with IO?
I'm not going to speak to whether your frustrations and my frustrations are similar. I will speak to frustration in general. Pete, when we are dealing with systems as massive, as complex, as interwoven as governments and multi-layered governments and the interactions between two massively complex systems, As someone in the system, I can speak to that frustration. As someone working to make improvements in that system, I can speak to that frustration. So, yeah, of course, I think everyone in this situation is frustrated. And I think that speaks to the reality that there is no silver bullet that's going to fix these problems. These problems are going to be worked at and chipped away at very slowly and very methodically. And that we have to understand that if we think we're going to make great leaps and bounds in a moment, that's not a reality. The reality is that we have to slowly chip away at these problems one at a time, consistently and intentionally.
Last question, the 310 Division Street, there's been talk about it, what's going to happen, it's almost like it's said, obviously the purchase is a done deal, but like anybody else doing something to their home or something to a business that's a new business coming in or something like that, it obviously has to go through Coburg Council.
No, Pete, and I think that's really important to talk about. When it comes to development of properties, that goes through our planning and building department. And our planning and building department are unbelievably structured and have legal requirements. There's not a lot of interpretation when it comes to these processes and systems. And I think we have to talk, if you really want to get into it, I don't have the exact wording, but when it comes to the upper tier to lower tier responsibility, very similar to the provincial to the lower tier, there is a place and there is an order with which things happen. And when you're dealing with an upper tier level that has the responsibility and the mandate to provide social services, there are always tools in their envelope with which to get that done. And it often becomes very difficult for a lower tier government like Coburg to get in the way of an upper tier government in providing a service or a mandated requirement at that level. Very similarly, the county would have difficulty obstructing us in something we're doing if it's a mandated responsibility that we have to take care of. So this is part and parcel of how the government's organized. And if you want to do a follow-up, I'm happy to sort of go into the details. But I would speak to the planning if you wanted to learn about that, because I actually went and had this conversation. And there's processes and there are procedures. And so we're going to follow those. But I know what you're asking, and you're asking, can Coburg Council get in the way of this?
If citizens, like as I say, if it deemed that citizens were concerned about it being there,
Again, we have to understand that there is only so much each level of government can and can't do, and I'm going to be looking into that further, obviously, but my initial investigation is that no, and I think we also have to talk about, just because it's a solution and it's a discussion, it doesn't mean it's all said and done. And I think that's a misnomer in the community. What is done is that we purchased an asset, and it was a good purchase. What happens next is up for discussion. There's going to be public consult. We have a group of incredibly dedicated professionals looking at this, and they want to hear from the public. They want to hear their concerns, and they want to hear their suggestions, and we need to find a way moving forward. Up until now, we haven't had any solutions being presented. Up until now, we've had a bunch of the community complaining about various areas and various services being provided, and the county stepped up and said, hey, here's an idea, here's a potential solution, here are some things that this would solve. And just because you're creating a solution doesn't mean you're not going to have problems associated with that solution. It's about moving the needle in the right direction. It's about progress over perfection, and always looking for ways that we can do better without expecting all of our problems to be solved overnight.